Listen up, because what I'm about to tell you will fundamentally change how you view your disability benefits, how you prepare for your claims, and how you interact with the entire system designed to support you. We're talking about the VA rating system, that opaque, confusing, and often deeply frustrating process that assigns a percentage to your sacrifice. For years, you've been told to trust the process, to believe the numbers reflect your reality. But the truth is far more complex and, frankly, far more dangerous to your financial and medical stability. After this video, you will realize that the percentage on your VA award letter is not a reflection of your true suffering. It is often a bureaucratic negotiation, structured in ways you were never meant to understand. We are pulling back the curtain on the 7 core reasons why you should never trust your VA rating the same way. Again, starting right now with the biggest deception of all. The very first flaw in the system, the one that veterans encounter but rarely truly grasp, is the myth of the straight percentage. Why the numbers don't reflect real life. When you receive a 30% or 70% rating, you naturally assume that this percentage reflects the actual loss of function, the actual pain, or the actual number of days you struggle to get out of bed. You believe it represents a clinical, objective assessment of your inability to work or live normally. This is the central myth. The VA rating system is fundamentally a scheduler system, meaning it attempts to fit your unique, complex, and often multifaceted condition into a predefined static box found within the 38 Code of Federal Regulations, specifically the Disability Rating Schedule. This schedule was written decades ago, and while it has seen updates, it struggles desperately to keep pace with modern medical understanding, especially concerning chronic pain, mental health, and the cumulative effects of multiple service-connected issues. For example, a veteran with severe chronic back pain might be scheduled at 20% because their range of motion falls just outside the threshold for 40%. That 20% number might seem reasonable on paper, but it fails entirely to account for the secondary effects: the inability to play with their children, the constant use of high-dose painkillers, the resulting isolation, and the inability to maintain consistent employment due to flare-ups. The rating schedule only looks at the impairment criteria defined in the regulation, the measurable physical limitations, not the true, lived impact on your employability and quality of life. This distinction between the scheduler rating and the actual vocational impact is massive. It creates a gap where veterans are often undercompensated because their life doesn't fit neatly into the VA's regulatory pigeonhole. Furthermore, the scheduler rating doesn't account for the intensity of the symptoms, only the frequency or the measurable deficit. You could have crippling migraines that occur only once a month, yet if those migraines render you completely non-functional for 48 hours, the scheduler rating may only assign a minimal percentage because the frequency is low, ignoring the severity of the incapacitation. This lack of holistic assessment is the first major red flag. The VA is measuring an impairment, not a life. They are measuring a static number, not a dynamic condition that waxes and wanes. The number 50% sounds definitive, but it is merely a legal designation, a bureaucratic placeholder, and rarely a true mirror of your daily struggle. The system is built on a foundation of averages, attempting to quantify the unquantifiable, and when your suffering is above that average, the system fails you. This failure is systemic, not accidental. It keeps the cost down by enforcing strict adherence to measurable criteria, even when those criteria are medically outdated or incomplete. We must remember that the 38 CFR is a legal document, not a medical textbook. It prioritizes standardization and administrative efficiency over individualized medical justice. This is why veterans often feel unheard. Their personalized trauma is being processed through a generalized formula. They are looking for a diagnosis. The VA is looking for a checklist item. And if your checklist doesn't match the regulation perfectly, your rating will be suppressed. It's an issue of definitions. When the VA defines severe back pain, Their definition is based on quantifiable range of motion measurements, usually taken by a contracted examiner who may spend only 15 minutes with you. Your definition of severe is based on the day you couldn't lift your grandchild or the night you spent on the floor because the pain was too intense to climb into bed. These two definitions are fundamentally incompatible, and the VA's definition is the only one that counts in the rating decision. This inherent conflict is why many veterans pursue individual unemployability, IU claims, because they recognize the scheduler rating fails entirely to capture their true inability to maintain substantially gainful employment. IU is essentially an admission by the VA that the scheduler rating system is often inadequate for determining real-world economic impact. But even the IU process is arduous, requiring extensive documentation that proves the service-connected disabilities are the sole reason for unemployment, a burden of proof that is incredibly difficult to meet, especially for older veterans or those with complex non-service-connected conditions. The VA rating percentage, therefore, serves less as a measure of disability and more as a starting point for a legal battle. It is an initial offer, not a final assessment. Accepting it as gospel is the first mistake many veterans make, leading them to miss critical opportunities to appeal and articulate the true scope of their impairment beyond the rigid boundaries of the rating schedule. The system is designed to be a one-size-fits-all solution, but disability is inherently a one-size-fits-one problem. If the first flaw is the flawed math, the second is the biased messenger. Let's talk about key. The C&P exam trap. How contracted examiners are incentivized against you. The compensation and pension C&P exam is arguably the single most critical step in determining your rating. It is the moment when a medical professional, often hired by a third-party contractor like QTC, VES, or LHI, translates your life experience into the clinical language the VA needs to assign a percentage. You might think this examiner is your advocate, a neutral party focused solely on accurately documenting your condition. You would be dangerously wrong. These contracted examiners operate under immense pressure and specific financial incentives that often run counter to your best interests. Think about the structure. These are high-volume operations. Examiners are paid per exam, not per hour of deep, thoughtful analysis. This drives a need for speed. A thorough, complex mental health evaluation might require 2 hours. Many contracted examiners are aiming to complete it in 45 minutes to maximize their daily volume. This rush inherently compromises the quality and depth of the examination. The examiner is not incentivized to spend extra time probing for subtle symptoms or reviewing your extensive medical history. They are incentivized to fill out the Disability Benefits Questionnaire, DBQ, as quickly and efficiently as possible, checking the boxes that lead to a conclusion. And what conclusion are they often implicitly encouraged to reach? A conclusion that is well supported by existing evidence and does not introduce significant complexity or ambiguity that could lead to an expensive appeal or a high rating. While the VA claims these examiners are neutral, the companies employing them are in the business of providing services to the VA. Their continued contracts depend on efficiency and, arguably, results that don't excessively inflate the overall cost of benefits. This creates a subtle but pervasive bias toward minimizing the scope of disability or finding ways to attribute conditions to non-service-related factors, even if subconsciously. The examiner's relationship is with the contracting company, which is paid by the VA, not with the veteran. This is a crucial distinction. When an examiner writes a negative nexus opinion stating your current condition is less likely than not due to service, that opinion is often given heavy weight by the VA rater, even if your private physician provides a contradictory, detailed opinion. Why? Because the VA considers the C&P examiner to be an expert in VA claims adjudication, whereas your private doctor is merely an expert in medicine. This institutional preference is a massive hurdle. Furthermore, these examiners often lack continuity of care. They are strangers. They don't know your history, they haven't treated you through flare-ups, and they don't see the daily impact of your condition. They are performing a snapshot assessment, a single moment in time, and using that limited view to make a permanent determination about your health. If you are having a good day during the C&P exam, that good day can be documented as your baseline, resulting in a significantly lower rating than you deserve. If you fail to clearly articulate the worst aspects of your condition, the examiner will only document what they observe and what you explicitly state. They are not trained to read between the lines of veteran stoicism. They are trained to document objective findings according to the DBQ. The C&P exam is not therapy. It is an adversarial legal process disguised as a medical consultation. Veterans must understand this dynamic. They must be prepared to articulate their symptoms at their worst, not just their average, and they must be ready to challenge any assumptions or inaccuracies in the examiner's report. Relying on the C&P examiner to be your neutral fact finder is one of the most common and costly mistakes veterans make, leading directly to ratings that are far too low and fail to capture the reality of their service-connected impairment. The sheer volume of exams these contractors handle also means that quality control is often secondary to throughput. Errors are common: misdiagnoses, failure to review all relevant service treatment records, STRs, or incomplete documentation of subjective complaints. These errors are then rubber-stamped by the VA, forcing the veteran into a lengthy and expensive appeal process just to correct a clerical or procedural mistake made by a rushed contractor. This system is not designed to find the maximum benefit you deserve. It is designed to process claims efficiently according to the minimum legal requirements, and the C&P exam is the bottleneck where efficiency often trumps accuracy. You must view the C&P examiner not as a doctor treating you, but as a fact finder for the opposing side in a legal proceeding, because that is precisely their function within the bureaucratic structure. Moving past the flawed examination process, we encounter the hidden gatekeepers. The rater's discretion. The shocking power of the VSR and RVSR outside of the M21 manual. Most veterans believe that their claim is processed by a computer or a simple checklist. They imagine a standardized, objective process where the evidence is fed into a machine and a rating percentage pops out. This is a fantasy. The people who actually assign your rating, the Rating Veteran Service Representatives, RVSRs, wield an astonishing amount of subjective power, often operating in gray areas that can dramatically influence the outcome of your claim, even when the medical evidence is ambiguous. The VA operates under the M21-1 Adjudication Procedures Manual, which is thousands of pages long and intended to standardize the process. However, the M21 is not a perfect algorithm. It requires interpretation, judgment, and the application of legal precedent. This is where discretion enters, and where your rating can be significantly depressed or elevated based on the individual rater assigned to your case. For instance, consider the process of establishing a nexus, the critical link between your current disability and your military service. If the medical evidence is split, one doctor says likely related, the C&P says less likely related, the RVSR must weigh the evidence. The M21 provides guidance, but the final determination involves interpreting the credibility and probative value of each piece of evidence. An RVSR who has a conservative interpretation of the benefit of the doubt rule might lean heavily on the C&P examiner's opinion, leading to a denial. Conversely, an RVSR who is more veteran-friendly might give greater weight to the veteran's lay statement and the private medical opinion, granting service connection. This difference in interpretation, which is entirely dependent on the individual rater's training, experience, and personal disposition, can be the difference between a 0% rating and a 50% rating. It introduces a massive element of chance into the system. You are, in effect, rolling the dice on which RVSR handles your file. This subjectivity extends beyond just the nexus. It affects how comorbid conditions are evaluated, how subjective symptoms like pain or fatigue are translated into the scheduler criteria, and how complex legal issues, such as secondary service connection, are analyzed. The RVSR must navigate intricate legal principles, including the nuances of Schofield versus Derwinski regarding lay evidence, or the Gilbert versus Derwinski standard for the benefit of the doubt. If the rater is poorly trained, overworked, or simply rushing, these legal principles may be misapplied, resulting in an erroneous decision that requires years of appeals to overturn. The vastness and complexity of the M21 manual actually create more opportunity for subjective error, not less. Because no single RVSR can perfectly internalize thousands of pages of policy, they develop shortcuts and personal interpretations. These shortcuts, while making their job faster, introduce variability into the rating outcomes. This means that two veterans with nearly identical medical records and service histories could receive vastly different rating decisions simply because they were assigned to different RVSRs. The VA system is not a machine of objective justice. It is a bureaucracy run by humans, and those humans hold immense, often unchecked, power over your financial future. Recognizing that the RVSR is a person with discretion, not a robot, is key to preparing your claim. You must structure your evidence not just to meet the minimal requirements, but to persuade the human being reading the file that granting the benefit is the correct, legally supported, and morally sound decision. If you fail to account for the human element, you risk being denied by a rater who simply chose the path of least resistance or the most conservative interpretation of the law. This discretion is the hidden variable that makes the VA rating process inherently untrustworthy on a case-by-case basis. It means your rating is not absolute truth. It is merely one person's interpretation of a mountain of evidence, and that interpretation is subject to human fallibility and institutional pressure. Now, let's discuss the fundamental legal hurdle that veterans face before they even step into a C&P exam or get their file reviewed by an RVSR. This is the pernicious presumption of soundness. The burden of proof is always on the veteran, even when it shouldn't be. When you enter military service, the VA automatically presumes that you were sound, that is, healthy and free of any disabilities. This is called the presumption of soundness, and it is a legal fiction that creates an enormous, often insurmountable, burden of proof for the veteran seeking service connection. If a condition manifested during service, the VA's default position is that it was incurred in service unless there is clear and convincing evidence showing it existed prior to entry and was not aggravated by service. This sounds reasonable, but the reality is brutal. If your service treatment records, STRs, are incomplete, lost, or simply failed to document an early onset of symptoms, a common occurrence given the nature of military medical care, the VA defaults back to the presumption of soundness. They assume you were fine, and it is entirely your responsibility, decades later, to prove otherwise. This burden is exacerbated by the military culture itself. Service members are often discouraged from seeking medical care for minor or even moderate issues, fearing it will affect their career progression, security clearance, or deployability. They tough it out. Years later, when the condition has become chronic and debilitating, the veteran files a claim. The VA reviews the STRs, sees no record of treatment for the first 10 years of a condition that started during service, and denies the claim based on a lack of evidence in service. The veteran is then forced to rely on complex, expensive, and often retrospective medical opinions to overcome the VA's initial presumption. This legal structure essentially punishes veterans for their stoicism and for the military's own shortcomings in medical documentation. Furthermore, the burden of proof is not just about proving the condition existed, it's about proving the nexus to service. The VA requires evidence that the disability is, at least as likely as not, due to service. While this is supposed to be a low threshold, a 50-50 tie goes to the veteran, the presumption of soundness makes it feel like 90-10. The VA often scrutinizes pre-service records with a fine-toothed comb, searching for any hint of a pre-existing condition, even minor ones, to rebut the presumption. If they find an old childhood injury, they may attempt to argue that the current service-related condition is merely a natural progression of that pre-existing injury, thereby denying service connection entirely or limiting it only to the degree of aggravation, which is notoriously difficult to prove. This legal maneuvering places the veteran in a defensive position from the start. They are not simply presenting a claim, they are fighting an institutional assumption of their prior health. This means your rating, or lack thereof, is often determined not by the severity of your current disability, but by your ability to retroactively overcome a legal presumption that was established the day you signed your enlistment papers. This systemic bias is why thorough documentation, including detailed lay statements and buddy statements that describe the onset of symptoms during service, is absolutely essential. If you cannot overcome the initial presumption, the severity of your current disability becomes irrelevant and your rating remains 0, regardless of your suffering. The system is designed to protect the government's purse first and only secondarily to compensate the veteran, and the presumption of soundness is the primary legal tool used to maintain this defensive posture. If the legal structure is flawed, the medical application of that structure is often bottlenecked. Let's delve into the silence of the ratings schedule, what the 38 CFR doesn't cover, and how mental health often gets bottlenecked. The 38 CFR, Part 4, the Schedule for Rating Disabilities, attempts to provide a comprehensive list of conditions and their associated severity levels. However, it is inherently a document rooted in older medical models, and it struggles significantly to accurately rate conditions that are complex, subjective, or newly recognized. This silence in the schedule means that many veterans are rated by analogy, forcing a square peg into a round hole, which inevitably leads to an inaccurate and untrustworthy rating. The most glaring example of this is the rating of mental health conditions. While PTSD has a dedicated rating system, many other mental health issues, such as generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, or somatic symptom disorders, are often rated under the same general criteria. These criteria focus heavily on social and occupational impairment, using metrics like difficulty maintaining employment, frequency of panic attacks, or ability to manage personal relationships. The problem is that many veterans develop sophisticated coping mechanisms, masking their symptoms, isolating themselves, or becoming hypervigilant, which allows them to appear functional on the surface, especially during a brief C&P exam. The rating schedule often fails to capture the sheer effort required to maintain this facade, the internal suffering, or the severe limitations that manifest only in private life. A veteran might be able to hold down a job, but only by expending 150% of their mental energy, leaving them completely depleted and unable to function socially or domestically outside of work. The VA rater, looking at the job stability, may assign a lower rating, say 30%, based on the appearance of moderate occupational impairment. This rating is untrustworthy because it ignores the hidden cost of the veteran's functional capacity. The schedule's silence on certain modern chronic pain syndromes is another major issue. Conditions like complex regional pain syndrome, CRPS, or fibromyalgia, which involve widespread, intractable pain, are often rated based on secondary effects, ischemia, limitation of motion in a joint, rather than the overall systemic impact of the pain itself. The VA does not rate pain per se. It rates the functional limitation caused by the pain. This distinction is critical and often leads to underrating. A veteran with severe, constant nerve pain might have perfect range of motion, leading to a minimal rating, even though the pain makes concentration and physical activity nearly impossible. The schedule's failure to adequately address the intensity and systemic nature of these conditions forces the rater into an analogical rating, which is inherently subjective and often conservative. The VA rater must choose the closest analogous condition, and that choice can dramatically alter the rating. If the rater chooses a conservative analogy, the veteran is underrated. If they choose a more liberal analogy, the rating may be higher. Again, the outcome depends on the rater's discretion in filling the silence of the schedule, making the EMA final percentage inherently unreliable as a true measure of disability. This is why veterans must be meticulous in documenting the functional limitations caused by their symptoms, translating subjective pain into objective inability to perform specific tasks, because the schedule is deaf to the simple statement, "I am in constant pain." It only hears, "I cannot lift a 20-pound box." If the system is designed to be defensive, it needs a good denial mechanism. Enter the VA's favorite denial tool, the not at least as likely as not standard explained and dismantled. We briefly mentioned the benefit of the doubt rule, which is enshrined in 38 U.S. South Tossi, paragraph 50107b. This rule mandates that if the evidence is in relative equipoise, meaning it's 50-50 whether a condition is service-connected, the tie must be broken in favor of the veteran. This is one of the few statutory advantages veterans have. However, the VA has mastered the art of manipulating the evidence record to ensure that the evidence never reaches that 50-50 equipoise threshold. Their primary method is the negative nexus opinion generated during the C&P exam. When a C&P examiner concludes that a condition is less likely than not, meaning below 50%, due to service, this negative opinion is given high probative value by the RVSR, effectively destroying the possibility of equipoise. The RVSR can then deny the claim, stating that the veteran failed to meet the burden of proof because the weight of the medical evidence, the C&P opinion, pushes the scale below the 50% mark. The problem lies in the institutional preference given to the VA's own contracted examiners. Even if a veteran presents a detailed, well-reasoned medical opinion from their treating physician stating the condition is likely due to service, the RVSR can legally discount the private opinion if the C&P examiner's opinion is deemed more persuasive or better reasoned, particularly if the C&P examiner reviewed the STRs. This means the VA effectively controls the 50-50 tiebreaker by ensuring the evidence never gets there in the first place. The system is rigged to avoid equipoise. Furthermore, the VA often employs what is known as cherry-picking evidence. They may focus exclusively on one sentence in a C&P report or one section of the STRs that supports a denial while ignoring lay statements, buddy statements, or other medical records that support service connection. This selective reading ensures that the final decision can legally state that the weight of the evidence is should be against the veteran, thus justifying the not at least as likely as not conclusion. The veteran is then forced to appeal, arguing that the VA failed to adequately consider all evidence, a process that adds years of delay. The inherent untrustworthiness of the VA rating stems from this manipulation of the burden of proof. The VA is not required to prove that the condition is not service-connected. They are only required to show that the veteran failed to prove it is service-connected. This subtle shift in the burden allows the VA to use the less likely than not standard as a pervasive, low-effort denial mechanism, ensuring that many legitimate claims never move past the initial denial stage. If your rating is 0% or denied, it is often because the VA successfully deployed this denial tool, not because your condition is genuinely unrelated to your service. Understanding this mechanism is vital because it informs how you must prepare your evidence. You cannot just aim for 50%. You must aim for 100% certainty to overcome the institutional bias built into the C&P process. Finally, let's talk about the math itself. Even when you win service connection for multiple conditions, the system is designed to suppress your overall rating. This is the VA math deception, how the combined rating table is designed to suppress higher percentages. When a veteran has multiple service-connected disabilities, the VA does not simply add the percentages together. A veteran with a 50% rating for PTSD and a 30% rating for a knee condition does not receive an 80% rating. They receive a combined rating calculated using the VA's combined rating table, and this table is designed to ensure that the effective level of disability never approaches 100% until the cumulative impact is truly devastating. The VA starts with the highest rating, in this case 50%. They then apply the next highest rating, 30%, to the remaining functional capacity. If the veteran is 50% disabled, 50% capacity remains. 30% of that remaining 50% is 15%. So 50% plus 15% equals a 65% total disability. This is then rounded to the nearest 10, resulting in a 70% rating. The deception is subtle but powerful. The VA is always calculating subsequent disabilities against a smaller and smaller pool of remaining able-bodiedness. This mathematical trick ensures that achieving the 100% scheduler rating is incredibly difficult. For example, to move from a 90% rating to a 100% rating, you must have a new disability that accounts for 50% of your remaining 10% capacity, meaning you need a 50% disability to move 10 percentage points. The math is designed to create diminishing returns as your disabilities accumulate. This means that two veterans with the exact same list of individual ratings will receive the same combined rating, but their actual lived experience of disability might be vastly different. The combined rating table is a statistical tool, not a measure of cumulative pain or functional loss. It is a financial mechanism designed to limit the VA's overall liability by ensuring that the cost of each subsequent disability decreases exponentially. For a veteran struggling to manage 3 or 4 severe conditions, seeing their combined rating plateau in the 70% or 80% range, despite having individual ratings that sum up to 120% or more, can be profoundly demoralizing and financially crippling. They feel correctly that the VA is minimizing the cumulative impact of their sacrifice. The combined rating table is one of the clearest examples of how the VA rating system prioritizes administrative and financial control over the accurate representation of a veteran's total impairment. The percentage you see is a manufactured number, constrained by a formula that actively suppresses higher outcomes, making it fundamentally untrustworthy as a holistic measure of your health and ability to function. The entire system, from the initial presumption of soundness to the final mathematical calculation, is structured as a defensive mechanism. Your VA rating is not a trophy of recognition. It is a negotiated settlement, constrained by legal fictions, subject to human discretion, and often based on rushed, biased medical opinions. The percentage on your award letter is not the truth. It is merely the government's current assessment of its legal liability to you. To navigate this system successfully, you must stop trusting the process to be fair and start treating it as the complex legal battle it truly is. You must be meticulous in your documentation, aggressive in countering negative nexus opinions, and fully aware that every step, from the C&P exam to the RVSR's desk, is designed to challenge, not confirm, the legitimacy of your claim. The numbers are flawed, the process is biased, and the discretion is dangerous. Now that you understand the hidden flaws, you can finally take control of your claim and fight for the compensation that truly reflects your service and your sacrifice.